what I would really like to talk about is what I think is a kind of a summarizing experience in the classroom of all the things that you might be learning about and working on with your students, and that is songwriting. Now, anybody in here ever written songs before? A couple people? Okay, what's involved in writing songs? We're going to kind of talk about this for a while, but I just want to start by kind of asking you the question, what are some of the things that you need to do in order to be able to write a song?
Have a melody.
Okay, and if you don't have one, where do you get one?
From your brain.
Okay, so you experiment.
Yeah, yeah.
And honestly, for those of you who have imagined doing this or have actually done it, do you walk around waiting for the melody to appear in your brain? You know, there's that kind of magic conception of how melodies come. You know, the Mozartian kind of, you know, bing, there it is, and then you sit down and it just flows out of your pen or whatever on your keyboard. Or do you work at it? Like, is it inspiration or perspiration? Yes?
A little bit of both. Sometimes it can just be an aha, I want this. Or sometimes it can be sitting down and going, I want something like this, and working it out.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think in education, especially like in classrooms when you're studying certain aspects of education, you look at the range of possibilities. I said here, do you wait for it to spring into your head? How often does that happen? Probably rarely. Do you just work and work and work at it, and pretty soon you have an awesome melody? Occasionally, but it doesn't always work that way. And I think you're quite right. I think it's probably, you have to be ready for something in between pure inspiration and pure perspiration. That's just the way that it is. And I think the more you write, the more spots you occupy on that continuum, okay? I know that some of you are probably thinking, like I've often thought, well, if you're using as the basis for classroom work, the students' compositions, and maybe writing some of your own songs to show them how it goes, maybe the quality of the music might not be as great as, say, if you were studying some of the classics, correct? But I would argue that most of the material that you use in schools, and it doesn't matter if you're rehearsing your handbell choir in the 4th or 5th grade, or you are doing a concert band piece, most of it is music that is probably not what you would consider to be the greatest music in the world. Isn't that true? But you use it for its instructional power, its instructional capabilities, and the way that you can get students to do things, learn things along the way by doing that kind of music. So I would propose that your own music is quite as good as most of the music that you use in music education, which is not to criticize that music. It's just to say that whether you write songs or not, you're going to end up writing arrangements of things. You're going to get a piece, and it's going to be for instruments, and you're only going to have and lots of them, and weird balances of things, and you're going to be arranging, and maybe even changing things. You might even be writing pieces that your group can perform, rather than flipping through catalogs trying to find something that you can do. So you might be writing songs no matter what, just in doing any kind of music. I like to think, though, that there's something about writing songs that's maybe different from all the other things that you've studied in music. Can anyone tell me what about writing songs is maybe different from what you are used to doing?
There are lyrics.
Working with words and music, and that's always a, you know, because obviously that takes some practice. There's that idea of setting words to music as in that there's an art and a craft to it, and that sometimes some songwriters are really, really good at it, and that's what makes it a good song. Can anyone think of an example of a song where maybe you haven't thought about this, but where the words just perfectly go with the melody or anything? Some might argue that memorable lyrics that that are easy to learn to a song, are lyrics that are set well, and ones that are not. And this whole process that we're talking about is called prosody. Anybody heard that term before? Prosody, the setting of words to music. How's my printing? Very good?
Lovely.
Thank you so much. Okay, so do you think that you would be good at this, prosody? Do you think it would be fun? Would you look forward to it if I said, here's a short poem, please set this to a melody and then bring it, we'll kind of share with each other and compare what the melodies are like? Can you imagine that that would be fun? Because you know that they would all be very different. And not just different in the way that they are accompanied, that is maybe on guitar or piano or some solo or whatever, but actually what is done musically, structurally with the poem, don't you think? Yeah. And so you can imagine that that would be kind of a good kind of entry to songwriting that you could do in a classroom, right? And you actually wouldn't need to do this necessarily just at the secondary level. You could also do this at the elementary level. And I also think that writing songs, or that is the songs that you produce, tend, like remember we talked about the 4 social functions of music. Certain cultural groups prefer certain kinds of songs. Don't you think? Can you give me an example? Like maybe of a style of music that defines a cultural group and the kind of song that's in it?
Latin.
Okay, very good. And what's the, you mean kind of rhythmically driven, dance-oriented kinds of music? Yeah, and it attracts a certain kind of head, and it has a certain kind of lyrical function in that music, right? Anything else? How about Taylor Swift? Now, okay, now I know, a little bit of snickering, but you know that song, right? Love Story? Is that the song? Okay, it's really hard to not hear it. But, and so you might experience it and not really be part of that culture, but is it a culture that kind of, what is that culture? Okay, and can you describe it to someone who's, say, never heard it, which I just said is kind of impossible, but how would you describe that kind of, lyric style?
They're always telling a story. It's not so much, you don't have to dig deep in the lyrics because they just kind of stated everything.
Okay.
It's laid out for you.
Okay, and it's very straightforward.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very straightforward, and it's usually thematically about a very small number of things, maybe comparative to other lyric types. And in fact, what we're trying to talk about seriously here is we often make jokes about country music and how, about its schematic. It's like got this and this and this, and you put these 3 elements together and you have a country song. But imagine how well that song relates to a lot of people. I mean, if it didn't resonate with a lot of people, there really wouldn't be much chance in that song prevailing on the internet or anywhere else. But as you know, it was just, wasn't it like the first million-selling digital download or something in the country genre? I think it was. Yeah. Now, let's talk about Taylor Swift for a minute. How did she write that song? Anybody know any details about it? Well, she wrote it in, she said, 20 minutes. About 20 minutes. Now, some of you might think to yourself, well, gee, it sounds like she wrote it in 20 minutes or something like that. But imagine for a moment that, compare that to, say, the music that from Western European common practice, like some of the greats, some of the classics, symphonies and serious composers, and what they went through to compose pieces. And you look at their bios, and like for instance, Hector Berlioz, who was broke and slaved, stayed up multiple nights scoring and rehearsing and trying to get his works done. I mean, it's the kind of polar opposite of Taylor Swift, right? Okay. Okay, so do you think that songwriting can be taught? Like, can you imagine working with students and teaching them songwriting? If so, why do you think that you can teach them? Like, for instance, in the case of Taylor Swift, what could she learn in your class that she can't do on her own in 20 minutes? Just think of some things. I mean, if you think that songwriting can be taught and you can imagine yourself teaching it, what is it that you can bring to the process that you think will help people write songs?
can teach them about like the form, like what type of form like a song should have, and like where to pull like from their personal experiences and each part of the song.
Okay, so I hear you first saying that we shouldn't abandon what we think are probably the core materials of music education, right? The musical concepts, the learning processes, things like that. I mean, you know the national standards, right? It would seem to me that the more national standards that are involved in the process of writing songs, the more musically engaging that process will be, don't you think?